Brought to you by Penguin.
The Nazis, A Warning from History by Laurence Rees. Read by Jonthan Keeble. If you gaze for long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you. Friedrich Nietzsche, Jenseits von Gut und Böse. Introduction. It's only by looking back that life takes on a pattern. That's as true of our own individual lives as it is of the great events of history. I never thought, for example, when I embarked on Nazis, A Warning from History in the early 1990s, that it would be the start of such a long journey. For it was only whilst making Warning from History that I fully realized the wealth of new historical material that the fall of the Berlin Wall had just made available in Eastern Europe. It was that, plus the growing realization that it was almost impossible to overemphasize the importance of the Hitler-Stalin War in any attempt to understand the mentality of the Nazis, that led me to move straight on to another project. I spent several more years writing, producing, and directing War of the Century, about the epic struggle between Nazism and communism. The pattern of all this work seems clear to me only now, in a way that it never was at the time, which is why I'm so grateful to BBC Books for reissuing here not just the original Nazis, A Warning from History, but for allowing me to incorporate within it the majority of the War of the Century book. For I think the material in War of the Century, particularly the chapter A Different Kind of War, vividly demonstrates the practical consequences of Nazism. Certainly, travelling around Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine, and hearing stories about the Nazi occupation, allowed me personally to gain a greater insight into the essential nature of Hitler's worldview. A bleak landscape, where pity is outlawed and life is reduced to a Darwinian struggle in which the weak deserve to suffer because it is their destiny. Of course, there are potential problems in slotting one book inside another. Some are easy to rectify, the danger of repetition, for example, and I've done my best to re-edit the text to avoid going over the same ground twice. I've also updated the content in places where my thinking has changed since writing the original words. That's particularly the case with the section on the origins of the Nazis' final solution. But there remains the real danger that, by focusing chiefly on the war in the East and hearing the extensive stories of Russian veterans, an impression is created that somehow the war in the West didn't matter. So I need to emphasize here that nothing could be further from my own belief. I grew up on the heroic stories of the sacrifice of British and American servicemen during World War II. My father flew in the RAF, and my uncle was torpedoed and killed whilst serving on the Atlantic convoys. It was because I wanted to see the full story of the Western Allies' fight against Nazism, told to the widest possible audience, that I devised television series such as Battle of the Atlantic and D-Day to Berlin, and then editorially oversaw their construction. But the book you are listening to is about something different. What I have tried to do here is to penetrate as deeply as I can the essential nature of Nazism. It's not a history of World War II, or an account of all the significant military decisions of the conflict, but an attempt to see how far it is possible to understand why the Germans and their allies did what they did. It is in pursuit of that aim, and that aim alone, that I thought it important to include the material from War of the Century. As I look back on this work now, I also see another aspect of it that I didn't fully recognize at the time. These books, and the television series that went with them, were based on approximately 100 unique interviews, many with former members of the Nazi Party. I had the chance to meet and question people who adored Hitler, worked for Himmler, fought on the Eastern Front, and committed atrocities whilst members of the SS. This is now an opportunity that is no longer available to anyone else who comes after me, for the simple reason that most of the people we interviewed have since died. In the heat of the production process, focused as I was on a forthcoming transmission or publication date, it didn't really occur to me that we were making something of value for future generations. Of course, as the number of survivors diminishes, attitudes to Nazism and World War II will also change. For my generation, the only way of understanding the world we grew up in was to know what happened during World War II. A divided Germany, the Cold War, the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?